Okay, so we're live. So this is Mike Morris. I'm Superintendent of Schools here for the Amherst Pelham Regional School District. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate this opportunity to have a town hall and to present a little bit, and mostly to do question and answer and gather feedback from the community. And basically what's going to happen here in a second, we'll do introductions, but the chair of the Regional School Committee will lead a presentation, a brief one, about a priorities document that was presented on Tuesday night at the Joint School Committee meeting. And then really that should, by about 5:15, we should be into question and answer. And we have a nice team of people here who can respond to different questions, myself included. And we just ask that people be respectful and follow typical norms of behavior in terms of asking questions. We really appreciate it. We had a session on the elementary schools this morning, and we had fantastic questions and really great dialogue. The way you put questions in, if this is your first time on a live stream on YouTube, is on the right side of your screen. You should see, I think it says say something, or it has a blank screen, and you can type your question in there, and we'll try to respond as best we can. We had a large number of questions in the afternoon session. We got to most, but not all, but we did collect them and we can address them over time. And again, the majority of this meeting is intended to be interactive and to gather your feedback, thoughts, questions, and ideas. So with that, I'll actually let Sarah, she can introduce herself. We can just go in order and then we'll get going with the presentation.
All right, thanks. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Hall, chair of the Pelham School Committee.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tiffany Thibodeau, a middle school math teacher.
Hi, I'm Allison McDonald. I'm from Amherst, and I'm the chair of the Amherst School Committee and the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee.
Why don't we go down like it's the Brady Bunch, and we'll go to Simon.
Hi, Simon Lutz. I'm the social studies department head at the high school and a longtime social studies teacher.
Hi, I'm Peter Dumling. I'm vice chair of the Amherst School Committee and a member of the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee.
Hi, I'm Margaret Stancer. I'm a member of the Pelham School Committee and also the vice chair of the Regional School Committee.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jill Consolino. I'm the nurse manager for the school district.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. McDonald, Chair McDonald, who's going to, other school committee members may jump in, but going to facilitate a description of the priorities document that was discussed on Tuesday night at school committee.
Okay. I'm sharing my screen. Is that
Yep.
Large enough? Okay. So welcome, everybody. For those that watched our meeting or watched the recording of our meeting from Tuesday evening, this will be familiar. This is a draft of what we called here a framework for planning, but it's really sort of the guiding principles document for our school committees to share and help guide Dr. Morris and the district in developing our plans for returning to school amid this health crisis in the fall. We discussed at length, and I will call attention to the very big red letters at the top, that this is a draft. This is not carved in stone. We are continuing to discuss it. We want to hear from you all today, and we will be continuing to discuss this on Tuesday of next week at our next joint meeting. We also prepared this in the context of a best case scenario in terms of our regional public health guidance. This does not necessarily, as we talked about on Tuesday, we're not in the situation that we are hearing about from other parts of the country, such as Florida and Texas. And so all of this is really predicated on what is our current health situation in our region, not necessarily what's happening in the far away states, but right here. What we started with is really our three overall goals. And number one of these is to protect staff and student safety. Our second goal is to maximize in-person learning time while maintaining 6 feet of physical distance. And third, to invest in and deliver the highest quality distance learning experience possible. With regard to the staff and student safety, we know that that conditions are changing and will continue to change throughout the school year. So number one, in terms of staff and student safety, we want to make sure that we're tracking, weighing, and continually monitoring the available public health guidance to protect the safety of our students and staff. We are going to be looking to the guidance from Centers for Disease Control, or the CDC, And as Dr. Morris earlier talked in our earlier town hall today, we're looking primarily to the guidance that we received from CDC back in May, and not any potential revisions that might be coming out soon. We're also looking at guidance from American Academy of Pediatrics, our state Department of Public Health, as well as our local and regional public health officials. Our district plans for reopening will be informed by the guidance from the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and particularly with regard to their requirement that we submit 3 plans for schools. The reopening plan will be designed as much as possible with requirements that at least 6-foot physical distance is maintained between all individuals, that all staff and students in grades 2 through 12, as well as younger grades if feasible, wear facial coverings as much as possible, and that all staff and students will engage in frequent hand washing and hand sanitizing. We also want to ensure that the district plans will provide accommodations for students and staff who have underlying medical conditions. With regard to in-person learning, the first 2 bullet items pertain to sort of time in school with in-person learning. And I will say that all of these, this isn't necessarily an either or. These are the principles for, in the case of a hybrid learning plan, the in-person learning and the distance learning are both true. So with regard to elementary students, including those in the Comandantes program in Amherst, we want to ensure that we're providing in-person learning, and this is a discussion point that we're still having with the school committee, whether it's 4 to 5 days per week or 80 to 100% of school days. And a particular note for our secondary schools, that middle school and high school students are provided in-person learning at least, again, this is a discussion point, whether it's 2 days per week or 40% of school time. Also, for our special education, English language learner students, and others that require specialized interventions, we want to provide as much in-person learning time as possible. We want to ensure that we have opportunities for outdoor learning. And we want to ensure that our hybrid and in-person learning approaches include plans for transitions to fully distance learning when our health conditions in our local area necessitate either school closure or other disruptions to in-person learning. We also want to ensure that staff and teachers are provided the support in both time and training to adapt to the requirements of in-person physically distanced learning environments. With regard to distance learning, we as our committees have talked about wanting this to be greatly improved from the emergency remote learning that we implemented in spring 2020, and should ensure consistency across instructional approaches within schools, employ instructional models that are well suited for a distance learning environment, offer appropriate levels of challenge for every student, and incorporate both synchronous and asynchronous approaches. Our models for distance learning should be developed for all grades in preparation for potential disruptions to hybrid or in-person learning. Plans should be created to support and train staff, students, and families in the instructional tools and technologies that we'll be using for distance learning. Districts should ensure that all students have devices and access to internet to support engagement with distance learning. And the teachers and staff will be provided support in time and professional development to adapt to distance learning instructional models. So that is, again, our draft document, and hope to hear some discussion and questions about these this evening.
Okay. Dr. Morris, do you want me to get straight into the questions?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. All right, so the first question is on the high school for the floor plan, the performing arts wing not being included. The question is, will there still be performing arts classes next year at the high school?
So we are receiving some guidance from the state as well as other authorities about that. There are some, particularly around singing and some instruments that are doing them in person. We would have a hard time pulling that off with the public health guidance we have. The performing arts wing we'd have a hard time using for other spaces, like other classes, like the auditorium is huge. It wouldn't really be an appropriate place. So we are looking through the guidance that we receive from the state and from federal and state public health authorities, but performing arts ends up being an area that it butts up against or hits up against public health guidance in many, many ways. So that is one of the more complex areas to try to figure out how to do given the guidance that we've received. So some areas, I think the DESE, the state, is coming out with their guidance the next week or two, but I have meetings with them weekly, and there's a lot of concerns. You may have seen even in the national news about chorus and singing and what that does in terms of transmission rates. So it is going to be a challenge for in-person education to include some of those performing art areas in a distance manner.
Okay. There are some related questions about extracurricular activities in general, so sports and performing arts, and then also other electives, so gym, art, orchestra, choir. So can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, so we're the MIAA, which is the Mass, I don't know the acronym, or I'll mess it up, but they're the state organization that is in charge of sports, is working, I know I got a survey from them this week. They're working with the state and public health authorities about what to do about athletics and some of the extracurricular activities. So we're looking for guidance. So I don't have real clear information. I will say that this week the governor came out, not so much for fall, but for summer, with what is considered a contact sport, and it included soccer and football and field hockey, I believe, and other sports. So again, no decision made for fall, but we'll hopefully get guidance in the next week or two about some of those areas.
Okay, thanks. Do you anticipate having to eliminate some course options, academic course options?
Yeah, so I think we're still looking at what to do with that, and some courses may be able to be taught in a virtual context that cannot be taught in a in-person context, and vice versa. So I know our high school team, there's multiple high school teams working on it. Actually, this week, they're looking at what schedule might work for high school, and they're also looking at what courses could be taught in person versus would need to be virtual. So there's actually 4 groups working on that, and 1 group is specific to the electives. So a lot of the teachers are meeting with the administration at the high school. And I got to sit in on one of those meetings, and people are doing really deep thinking, good work about what we can pull off and how do we maintain the level of course offerings. That's one of the hallmarks of our high school.
Next question is, can we have a plan flexible enough to allow more in-person time, 3 to 5 days a week, if conditions in Massachusetts continue to improve?
I'll let the school committee weigh in on that, I think. I mean, I'm happy to keep talking, but I wondered if anyone here wants to mention that. Actually, hold on that question. I'm sorry. Simon wanted to jump in, Simon Lutz, and just talk a little bit about instructional strategies in a distance learning environment that came up. So I don't mean, can we hold on that question and come back? I'm sorry. There's Simon.
Hi, yeah, a question popped up about instructional strategies that can be used in a classroom environment that requires, 6-foot distance, physical distance between teachers, students, and and students themselves. So this is an area that I'm really concerned about when we go back, and creates a lot of sort of anxiety. I know in my own sense of good teaching and what best practices look like in a classroom, I think we're going to have to be really inventive and maybe lean on the distance learning in this case, because all the things I think that make a classroom environment really engaging, really dynamic, a lot of those, if not most of those tools, are not necessarily going to be in our tool belt. The kinds of get kids in small groups to put their heads together to solve problems, working with kids one-on-one when you're standing sort of right next to them and helping them work through really difficult questions. The kinds of things that require you to close physical space are not going to be available to us as teachers. So I think it really speaks to the need to, A, make sure our distance learning plan is really strong, but B, how do we bring technology into the classroom that can also help close some of that physical space? So I'm really looking forward, and hopefully we can get some really strong professional development that both helps us think through how do we create that same kind of dynamism in the classroom in a distance learning model. I think that's really critical to have that as available to everyone. And then also, if and when we do return to the classroom, we also have built our capacity, our skill in closing physical distance through technology. Because I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of leaning on really sort of stiff traditional teacher-centered modes of instruction, with all the safety requirements of a 6-foot limit and masks, and you can't see folks' faces. So I know it's certainly an area that's causing teachers a lot of stress and anxiety and concern at the moment.
Great. Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it. So Peter, sorry to interrupt you earlier.
Okay. So just on the question of could we ever get to 3 to 5 days? So, I mean, I think the committee in general in previous meetings has been pretty clear that we want to make sure that anything that we do is responding to the changing pandemic status. And so that could be responding to a worsening status in which we need to go all or near all fully remote, but it could also be responding to a positive status. I mean, we're in a much different state of understanding the science than we were 4 months ago when this all hit. So it's not inconceivable that 4 months from now we could be in an improved state. You know, that being said, we do have some pretty hard obstacles to overcome at the region to get there. Our transportation definitely does not handle more than 50-ish% of students at the 6-foot distance. And neither would our buildings more than 50-60%. So, you know, I can't imagine a situation where we're at 3 to 5 days a week without that 6-foot distance that we've been so resolute about changing and that changing in the consensus scientific opinion.
Okay, thanks. The next question is about how in this district our response will be different from things in the Boston area, and just noting that Hampshire County reality is very different in this state than even Hamden County.
Jill, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Response in regards to.
I think what I took away from the comment or question is that the infection rate locally is
much lower than the Boston area
of Massachusetts, including Hampton County, I think.
Yeah,
so.
in this area, we peaked a lot later than the Boston area, and it could be due to a number of factors, which I will never know, and the state will probably never know. But we go by the guidance of what DPH gives us and the local Board of Health for any of the regulations that we need to put in place for going forward. And we are waiting for a lot of those recommendations to come down from Department of Ed in conjunction with Department of Public Health for any of the the health related protocols and that kind of stuff. So that's more to come. I've asked for it numerous times from the state level on certain protocols that we need to put in place for the fall, and I've kept being told that it's coming. So yeah, but we follow what DPH guides us, and it's no different than how Boston handles things. It's just we peaked a lot later, and our case count is at a different rate than in a closer knit city than like Boston compared to Amherst and that kind of stuff.
Thanks. Have we considered the use of modular buildings for the high school?
We have a little bit. This is not a surprise. Modular buildings are being pulled for lots of reasons these days. They're also quite expensive, and they create some space and some facilities challenges around access to water. When we could maybe manage that with some sanitizer. So we have, but what we found is that we're not, if we're maintaining a 6-foot distancing, we're not 1 or 2 classrooms away from being able to pull off everybody in. If we had a couple more modules, we would need so many modulars that it's sort of hard to imagine how that would really move the needle much for us in terms of increasing the access of students to school.
Will testing be required? And the questioner points out that some students are not practicing social distancing now.
So Jill, do you want to speak to the DESE guidelines around wellness checks and all that?
So the current guidance initially was thought that we were going to be doing temperature checks for every student coming in the building, but that's actually not the current guidance from DPH and DESE because there's so many false positives and false negatives going forward. There's a range of thermometers that we could use, and through interviewing just through this pandemic, not everybody actually experiences a fever with this virus. So we're going to go based on symptoms and do some type of symptom checker, which will actually rely on the parents of these students to attest that they are well enough to be in school along with staff. And it'll, go from there. And, we will not be doing any type of, physical screening. We will keep eyes on kids as they walk in the building. And if they seem symptomatic, then they will go right to the nurse's office for an evaluation. But that's, again, we're waiting for that specific guidance from the state. So. And then I do see another question about status of PPE. We took a proactive approach in our district to secure the majority of the PPE requirements that DESE had put out probably about a month ago to get about 90% of what the state is requiring. And we already have that physically in-house in the district right now. So we're waiting on a few things, but most of what's required is already physically in Amherst as we speak.
Okay. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because there's some related sort of specific health questions about options for people who may be vulnerable to COVID or may have a family member who is.
Yeah. And so, I just was on a conference call with DESE today, and they were really clear that students will have the opportunity, in that situation to not attend school, and the school districts are still responsible for educating them, including if they have special needs or English language learner, 504 plan, et cetera. We also have surveyed staff and are working on that front as well. So we'll have more to share on that probably in the next week or two, because all this is sort of fast moving. For instance, I mentioned this morning, we got our special ed guidance this morning right as the show was starting. So I read the executive summary, and then, the elementary show started. So the short story is no one will be forced to go to school, and that we are responsible, for virtual education needs the same at the high school level, 990 hours, and the curriculum standards will need to be met in a different way in the spring, where the time on learning requirements were not consistent with how they typically are. We had reduced standards that were happening. That's not true for next year. So for students, and regardless of the situation, why they're in a virtual environment, whether it's choice or health needs, they will need to have full access to the curriculum.
Next question is about in-person instruction. Can you speak about the in-person instructional strategies that can be used when students must be separated by at least 6 feet without any shared materials and with a teacher 6 feet away?
So I'm wondering if Tiffany and Simon, not that they're, I appreciate their presence on this. I'm not at all saying that they have all the answers, but one of the reasons we invited them to come in is because they're knowledgeable, and I know they're two excellent educators, done a lot of thinking about this, but not that they've actually done this. So I want to really caution my introduction, but I don't know if Tiffany or Simon, if you have some thoughts that you want to share.
Sure. I felt like Simon really captured it a lot when he spoke earlier. But I think that's one of the questions that teachers right now are sort of thinking about with our administrators, and we're trying to figure out how to make a really robust distance learning really curriculum that can also be used in the classroom. And noticing that when we went to the emergency closure and the spring, that the thing that was missing was that interaction with students. And being able to sort of answer questions one-on-one. So we really do have to get creative about how to be able to do that within a classroom, and really relying on technology maybe a little bit more than we would have during a normal school year as we try to support students. And Simon, I don't know if there's anything more you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think I saw another sort of related question about just the challenge that teachers are going to face in trying to have sort of multiple courses of study all going at the same time, right? We can imagine there's 2 cohorts of students that are going to come in front of you during the week. So you're going to have to manage those 2 programs. Kids are going to be, it looks like the proposal says 60% of the time. So the majority of their time will be distance. So you're going to have a distance learning program that you're going to have to manage for them, despite the fact that 80% of your time will be classroom time. the kids are only have 20% of their time or 40% of their time is classroom time. So there's that disproportion that's going to need to be managed. And then there's going to be this cohort of kids that, for good reasons can't be in the school building. So they're going to be full-time distance learning. So I think it really points to the need so that we don't leave anybody behind to have a really, really strong, I think our focus needs to be on building. And while I think we did some things well in the spring, building on and improving our distance learning model, so that, given the majority of kids' time is going to be distance, there's going to be some kids that are never in the school building, and that I think the in-class time is going to be about sort of enhancing, hopefully, the distance learning platform that's put in place. But there is a lot of work to be done in really strengthening that distance learning platform and building on the successes that we had in the spring, but also recognizing the real deficiencies that were there as well. That I know I felt as a teacher. There's about 15,000 things I would do differently now that I've done it once and could go back and make different choices. But I'd really like to sort of stress to administrators in the school committee how important it is going to be to put together a really robust, strong, meaningful distance learning program that takes, that both trains the teachers, but that also, leverages the expertise that we have in the middle and the high school.
Thank you. And this next one is actually a bit related in terms of distance learning and having something more robust. Will there be training offered to teachers for remote learning, and is there a commitment to synchronous learning?
So I can take that one on. So the short answer is yes. The expectation that I received from DESE is very clear that when we talk about 990 hours, that it is synchronous, that it's direct instruction. So how that works, we're all trying to think about. And, I know some places have trying to say, can you have synchronous, can you have virtual teachers and in-person teachers, and they're actually not teaching the same thing. So, the example Simon used before, that no one's having to do both because there's only so much one person can do, right? So in the example Simon used, where a teacher's in teaching students live 4 days a week, they can't also be in charge of the virtual piece. So I've seen some creative things, some coming from other states, of how to share that workload with virtual teachers and in-person teachers. And it provides a little more choice too, because you'll need teachers to do both. You'll need teachers who want to be in the school, and teachers who, either because of health reasons or other reasons, and are going to be teaching virtually. But I think the synchronous piece is something that is really clear that that needs to happen next year in different ways than what we did in an emergency. And I think one of the things I've said at school committee multiple times is there's a really difference between emergency distance learning and virtual education. And we were in an emergency in March, right? We closed before the state closed. We closed for 2 weeks, then it grew, and we didn't really know when it was going to end. And that's a really different piece than how we would approach the distance part in the fall.
Next one is a specific question. With Gene Jones's resignation, what is the plan for leadership next year?
Yep. So the short story is that in the next week or two, we'll be sharing more of that. And we are working, we're very fortunate to have an incredibly strong leadership team in terms of Mickey Gramacki and Talib Sadiq at the high school. And we'll be announcing that well before Principal Jones' departure in 2 weeks, or 2 weeks from tomorrow. So be on the lookout. We'll communicate that as soon as we can, and we'll do that. I actually didn't answer the second part of the prior question, Ms. Hall, so let me go back to it.
Sure.
I think some was about training, but also the pieces. One of the reasons we're trying to continue our work on these is that we really need to figure out what the model is going to be so we can provide the right training. So even, where Simon was talking before about, teacher teaching in school 2 days a week, how's that work? We have to actually know what our model is and then know who's doing what, and then we can provide the training. And I think the challenge for all of us, and I mean just in this district collectively, is there's no playbook for this situation, right? If there is, no one's found it, right? And so we're going as fast as we can, but we don't want to go faster than and not take into account all the feedback, and that's why we're having sessions like today.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to jump ahead a few because I think that answered a few questions about specifics that we just don't know the model yet, and so we can't really answer questions about specific schedule changes. But there is a question about communication with parents. How will parents be notified if students are completing assignments and attending remote sessions under the remote learning plan?
So, it's not something that necessarily I can answer really clearly, but actually Simon can. So I'll let him do that. Yeah.
Well,
more knowledgeable.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had some success with this in the spring, at least at the high school. One of the key ways, at least in tracking, parents being able to track whether or not distance learning assignments were being completed, was through the use of the PowerSchool gradebook. We devised a pretty simple, I know we were in a no credit situation, but a pretty simple set of symbols that allowed parents to check in with the gradebook and see if an assignment was either completed or missing, or in some state of incomplete. And we were posting assignments and the completion of assignments weekly. So there was a sort of easy online way to track at least completion of assignments. Given that synchronous learning wasn't required, there wasn't a sort of attendance pieces being kept, but I could imagine that would be a pretty simple procedure too, to set up some sort of attendance system. And then lastly, I know that at least teachers in my department worked really hard to try to communicate with families when students were not present, were not completing assignments, and were not checking in, and to communicate directly with families when that wasn't taking place. So I think we have some pretty solid systems in place. We can certainly strengthen them as we move to something that's more robust online, but I think we've got a good place to start and build on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon. And I feel like at the middle school, we didn't use PowerSchool during the spring semester, trying to figure out the right balance between being at the middle school age and what type of communication we wanted to provide to them. So it's been mostly feedback to assignments that were completed and emails home to families, and also trying to balance the amount of communication that also went home to families, so that we're not bombarding you with way too much information from all of the many different classes that students take. But I do imagine that in this new distance learning model, that the PowerSchool would be the primary way that we would be communicating with families about what students have turned in and what's been graded or assessed in that way, in addition to general means of communication like emails that families and teachers tend to use.
And if I could add just very briefly and less articulately than Simon and Tiffany, if we are in whatever version of distance or virtual next year, there will be grades. There will be attendance taken in a formal way. We took attendance more to identify who wasn't there. I got very clear direction on that on the last two conference calls with DESE. The curriculum standards will be taught for instance, in the middle school until the very, very end of, or maybe 3/4 of the way through this spring. The directive from DESE was to review prior taught content. That will not be the case in the fall for anyone involved in distance learning. So I do think, the systems that people are more familiar with will be a better fit next year, because it'll look much more similar to the typical school year. Even at the high school, there was, DESE's guidance last year was about half a day's worth of work. That will not be the guidance that we receive. Again, the 990 hours, I have no indication, actually I have pretty strong indication that won't change, whether it's in person or in distance or in hybrid next year. So I think that'll really look more similar to families and I think to staff as well. I know, I'm not going to put Tiffany on the spot, but I heard from many middle school teachers last year, it was only so long at a middle school level you can reteach prior taught concepts. And Tiffany teaches math, so I talked to her about it. I don't know how she did it, but at some point you got to do more than just review. And so I think that was because of the crisis situation, and certainly the pandemic isn't gone, but we're now, we know more than we did then. I think Simon spoke to this earlier. And so I do think it would be really significantly different just in that domain as well, in terms of the expectation, the mandatory attendance, the grades, and the full range of the curriculum being taught, again, in no matter which model, in person, fully virtual, or a hybrid model. That would be the responsibility. I want to add to that just as one comment, Ms. Hall, that's related. Room for catch up for those students who are not successfully engaged in distance learning, and there's going to need to be a lot of that. And I wasn't, and maybe I should have said that slightly differently. I think the expectation is that standards will be taught. We know that there was learning loss this spring, just based on a whole range of factors, based on individual factors, based on situational factors. And so I don't think we can start day one as if nothing happened. I wasn't trying to suggest that, but I think the piece is there's no sort of gating mechanism the way there was in the spring of, don't teach new concepts. That's not going to be a gate or a hurdle that anyone has to jump over in the fall.
Okay. There's a couple that we sort of have touched on, but this was a little more specific. Are there options for families or staff who have a reason to not return? Will there be choices for them?
Yeah, so we surveyed on the staff side, we surveyed staff of anyone who has a condition. We use the CDC guidance. Again, the original one, as Ms. McDonald suggested, we don't know what's coming out, but the one that seems perhaps issued with less political pressure, I'll put it that way. And staff members who will have that will make a determination. We had some of those conversations actually just this week with Human Resources, and we'll be getting back in touch with people in the next couple of days. It's a little unclear what documentation may be needed, but anyone who fits those categories absolutely will be given an alternate assignment, and in this case, likely a virtual assignment for that. And for students, the same way. Students will, my understanding from the state is, will have a full range of options, whether they have a health condition or not. And so we need to provide virtual for that, for those students. And again, this is all a moving target. I heard information about this. I had a conference call from 11 to 11:45 this morning before this other one. And I think one of the things that's really hard is it's July 9th, and this is not a faulting the state, but everything continues to evolve over time. So I'd love to have all the answers to all these questions. And so, and I see a comment, if any people didn't fill out that survey, please shoot me an email if you're a staff member and didn't get that or were away or whatever. But I think I'll turn it back to you, Ms. Hall.
Okay, thanks. So there's a specific question about students with a 504 plan in place and how they will be supported.
So, this document, and I'm not all the way through it, that I received from DESE earlier today about students with special needs, which is both those with IEPs as well as 504 plans. All those plans need to be followed, whether the students are in person or in virtual. So as I got it at 11 o'clock today, I'm not as informed to answer directly, but I did hear that today very clearly, that IEPs and 504s will need to be followed. There may need to be some adjustments based on a virtual environment, if that's either what a student chooses, or if based on a hybrid or live model. But the students' needs need to be met. There was another question about students in PIP program, more intensive needs. The one thing I can say is that in the DESE document, that they are the highest priority students to have in-person learning, according to DESE. I'll say personally, I really agree with that. Those are students who are less likely to have full range of the curriculum in a virtual context. Exactly how we implement that, I think, remains to be seen. But from DESE's point of view, and even on the draft document from the school committee, there's a lot of mention of that, that there are some students who virtual education is a better fit for, and for some students, that's a much harder fit. We do have PPE that's designed particularly for students, for adults working with students with more intensive special needs, including isolation gowns, K95 masks. Jill can go over it if there's more questions on that. But yes, absolutely. So I just want to acknowledge that question seemed related to the 504. So sorry to get ahead of you, Sarah.
No, that's okay. So yeah, there were some questions about masks, about what is the mask requirement, and then the question of, keeping kids in them all day, if that is the requirement.
So I'll turn to Jill for that.
So the current guidance from DESE that we have right now is anyone that's in grade 2 and up will be required to wear a mask during the school day. We don't have a specific vision as to how that's going to look. We do know that there's incorporated in that guidance that there will be mask breaks. Kids will be going outside. There'll be various times where kids will be able to take the mask off and give their face a break and a chance to breathe. There will be some kids that fall into the guidance where they are not required to wear a mask based on either a medical condition or a physical condition that prevents them from putting it on appropriately or being able to take it off safely. and the same thing goes with staff too. We will be asking families to provide masks or a facial covering for all students and for staff. And we have ordered a supply of extras in case those need to be replaced during the school day. And the grades that are kindergarten, first, under second grade, those are recommended, and that was addressed in the earlier town hall. But we're going by the guidance, and we're going to enforce it as much as we can, and hopefully the kids will be able to comply with it. We do have we are looking at options for some of the students that are hearing impaired and their classmates. So we're looking at alternative mask options for those children and the staff that work with those kids as well too.
Okay, thank you, Jill. And before we go to you, Simon, there is another mask related question. Why did the district buy 100,000 masks? They thought that we were providing masks. What type did we buy, and how will we approach kids who can't find or afford them?
So the formula, the calculation that I went through with Superintendent Morris is the Department of Ed, they sent out guidance as to purchase specific number of masks per student per week, masks per staff member per week. And then it trickled down based on the position that you played in the school district, whether it's a nursing role, a supportive staff member. And so based on those figures, we actually scaled down the number of masks, traditional surgical masks for the adults down by 1 per person per week, and upped it for the students. Department of Ed wanted 1 per student per week, and we upped it to 2 per student per week. And that's the number that we ended up coming up with the total number of students in district and staff in district. So we have a supply of regular surgical masks, adult size and pediatric size for our younger students. KN95 masks, those will be issued to anyone that works in departments of nursing, special education that are involved with students with more higher intensive needs, some of our transportation staff and some of our custodial staff. And then we have face shields and eye protection, and there's a whole list, but the huge number was based on the calculation and the formulation that Department of Ed gave us.
All right, go ahead, Simon.
Oh, thanks. So, the issue of masks and PPE, I just want to give voice to a concern that, I'm hearing from a lot of teachers around this issue, and especially around sort of getting kids and teenagers at early adolescence and later adolescence to sort of comply with this, and how potentially stressful and time consuming that might be. I think wearing masks and staying apart from their friends is sort of going against every fiber of being when it comes to adolescence. And I worry, and I know others worry, that school might just become this sort of constant battle to enforce, PPE and mask wearing and 6-foot physical distancing. So I saw some other questions about, what can folks do to support teachers? I think we are going to have to build, if we do go back to the classroom, we're going to have to build a really, really strong culture of personal safety. And that there's a role for the classroom teacher in that, but it is a wider challenge that buildings in the district, and I'm not just secondary and elementary level too, are really going to have to confront, and support from home, and parents in making that consistent and effective is going to be an essential element of it. But I do really want to, part of this is figuring out distance learning. Part of this is also figuring out how do we create a culture of a culture in the school that really embraces the safety of everyone and these measures, when we know that it's going to be really hard for teenagers to do this.
Yeah, and I'll jump in, and I agree with everything Simon said, and certainly I saw a question about disciplinary consequences, and that is the feedback I'm getting from the department, is that it be like any other article of closing that's required to be on during the school day, and we have consequences when students don't follow those regulations, and that the same would apply for masks, and there is some acknowledgement that mask breaks do need to happen, and throughout the day for both for staff and students, but the expectation would be, and with administrative support for teachers, so it's not all on the classroom teacher, as Simon indicated. I fully agree and endorse everything Simon said.
Okay, great. So there are a bunch of questions up there about if someone at the school tests positive, if a student or a teacher does, or someone in someone's home, what will be the process for notifying others? And then will there be any contact tracing protocol?
So that is to be determined. Again, I'm waiting for guidance from DESE and Department of Public Health on the exact steps that we need to take on the wording of notification. There will be a plan in place, and it will all depend on how well this 6 foot of physical distance is maintained and who we can identify as a potentially have been exposed to the virus, and how that all trickles down. If, say, for instance, if somebody's family member tests positive, it would be on the onus of that family to notify the school district that there's a positive case in their house. And that would probably come through my office or through the Amherst Health Department, so that we can notify the appropriate parties in the school building. And there would probably be a general notification, and it's going to come from the guidance that DESE is going to give us as to the steps to take, and it'll also be guided from how the health department in Amherst wants us to handle all that kind of stuff. They will do most of the contact tracing if it's an Amherst resident, and I will help give them any of the information that they need. But that's that whole plan. I've asked for it from the state level, and they said it's coming. So I wish I had the answer now, but I don't.
Great. Okay. A question came up on MCAS. Will that be a requirement?
That is not a local decision. So that's a state level decision that we don't have clarity on to date.
Okay. All right. Will school lunch be provided? And will there be any assistance for food at home during the school year?
So school lunch will be provided. We're not using the cafeterias, and I know the high school has already developed sort of a plan for how that would go. Lunches would be had in classroom spaces, not in the cafeteria, because again, we don't want cohorts of students congregating together outside the kind of courses that they're in. And beyond that, we don't have plans yet because we have to sort of figure out what the model is.
Mm-hmm. This question also came up this morning about the potential use of UMass buildings. Could we just address that at this one?
Sure. So, we're in constant communication with UMass on a whole range of factors, including last night and this morning. And it's not UMass's decision. I'm not going to make it UMass. I mean, just college and universities' decisions may necessitate that, or may create open space. But the idea is that the ones even that are opening are preventing outsiders from coming on campus. And much in the same way that we wouldn't have visitors in our buildings next year, they're in the same boat as well. So it doesn't look like a really super viable strategy to have some of our students over on a campus when they're trying to keep their campus only to campus personnel.
And then another question on space. Can you talk about the use of the tents and what those are for?
Yeah, so we do order 2 tents to go behind the school, at a school the size of the high school, and 1 for the middle school. At the middle school, it's a smaller school, so the idea is that teachers could rotate through who choose to, and be teaching outside. The 30 by 30 it's actually slightly larger than the typical spaces at the middle school and high school, and so it does provide more opportunities for outdoor education.
Okay, great. And then there's a few questions about the whole the hybrid model and doing in-person and distance, and how can one human do basically 2 full jobs?
Yeah, and I agree with those concerns, and I think that's really where we have to get a sense of what the model is and what our staffing model is, and who's working virtually and who's working in person, so that we can actually put that in place. I mean, I'll be the first to say, I don't think it's a reasonable model. It's sort of what Simon started with. I'm going to go, if it's okay to piggyback off your comment a half an hour ago or so. If someone's teaching in person, even if it's two groups 2 days a week, that person can't have other responsibilities to teach virtually. just doesn't work, right? So we will need a cadre of people who are teaching online, and then if people are teaching in person, they can't have dual responsibilities to do that. And so that's where we have to be really creative in our models. And I think there's really some tension in that about students who also want to be in the building and students who want to receive distance learning. And my hope, I guess, is that we can match those up reasonably well. The students who do feel like there's a benefit to some in person, have that opportunity, and students who feel like they want to have, and families who want to have all virtual, they'll have that opportunity as well. But I think in the next couple of weeks we'll be talking about that. I'll be talking about that at the school committee level. I don't want to put any of you in that. You may not talk about it. I don't know. That's your choice. But I'll be bringing up some different things. And the high school scheduling group, for instance, and the similar one starting at the middle school, they're looking at different models that might contribute or create some conditions by which that's a little more possible, especially for the in-school part, because currently at both schools we have what's called a 7-drop-1 schedule, which means students take 7 courses and 6 meet every day and 1 drops. That's not a viable schedule, particularly at the high school level with the number of electives. From a public health perspective, we can't do that. I'm going to be first to say, that's not an option. It's off the table. So we are looking at other models that would have fewer transitions for students and faculty during the day. And that's, we're still in process on that.
There's some questions about how much of the curriculum can be covered in a year, and will it be, regardless of the model, will the full curriculum be covered?
Yeah, that's going to be the expectation, is that students are receiving 990 hours of instructional content, and exactly what that looks like and how that goes is the challenge that we have to work on.
And then there's questions about, understanding that a lot of this can't be answered, about, what would a typical in-person day look like? How would students at the school be set up? Would they be in cohorts and stay together? What would that scheduling be like? Will it start later, end earlier? Will the same classes be taught? So a lot of questions just on a typical day of in-person learning if we do that.
Yeah, so that's, again, the schedule we're looking for. In general, what people would notice as a difference is they'd be in fewer cohorts over the course of the day, both at the middle school and high school. There certainly are implications for that at both levels. At the middle school with the team model, it's a little easier to imagine how that might work, because students, there's a little more capacity at the middle school level for a cohort to stay together. At the high school, there is no team model, and with the range of electives, that's again why a full schedule change would need to occur to make it based on all the guidance we're getting from all the sources that Ms. McDonald said at the beginning. So again, I think it would look like, Simon described physically in classes how students would look, and maybe I'll bring up that image in a second of how desks could be arranged at a secondary level. But I think practically you would have fewer interactions with different groups, again, to reduce based on the public health guidance that we've received.
This next question I think is more for school committee members. Is there a date by which parents can expect to receive a definitive district educational plan for fall 2020?
So I'll start, and I can see that Mr. Demling is raring to jump in as well. But we were asked this morning, and we don't have a definitive date, but it is going to be as soon as possible. We are continuing to discuss our priorities, the school committee priorities, at our meeting next week, and hopefully finalize those to help guide the district in finalizing models. And then the following week I think that's the 21st, is when we are planning to hear from Dr. Morris and the district about what those instructional models, learning models will look like for the fall. There's still, I would say, a lot of gray because there's still some key pieces of information that we're missing from DESE, not least of which is transportation guidance. So it's tough to say commit to a definitive date today until we know when we're going to have all that information. But we're moving as quickly as possible so that we can begin the hard work, so that the district and the educators can begin the hard work of preparing for whatever that model is, as well as any training and support that is needed to be ready to go when we come back to school. So I'll also look if Mr. Demling or Ms. Stancer or Ms. Hall would like to add anything.
I think that's very well put. I would be disappointed in our committees if we couldn't get this done by the week of the 21st of July. And it's really for the reason you mentioned. You know, this is such a seismic change to learning that our teachers need the training and ramp up time in order to deliver this effectively. Like, we do not want to set our teachers up to fail, and we don't want to set our students up to fail. And we're right, as of tonight, we're about 8 weeks or less away from the start of school, and it's been frustrating for the school committee, to be frank, that we're missing still multiple key pieces of guidance from the state, which is why we are way ahead of the curve compared to other communities in Massachusetts. That being said, I feel like we're already late, and so you know, I feel like the sooner the better that the school committee can finalize its framework, then the sooner the district can finalize its model, and then people will actually know what the final details. All these excellent questions that we can't answer because all these details aren't in place, you know, will be there. So, you know, I also would want to add to that, you know, one of your comments, Ms. McDonald, at the very beginning, this framework is a draft. It does have to be settled very quickly, but it is a draft. This is a very active conversation. You know, for my own part, I'm not settled on all the details in this draft. And we still continue to get really thoughtful input and feedback from teachers, parents, members of the public across all ranges of this. So I would say keep that coming. It's drinking from the fire hose, but it's exactly what we need right
now. This was touched on a little bit, but there do seem to be a number of specific questions about just recording classes in real time, installation of cameras. So can you just talk about that specifically, please?
Yeah, so I can. So it does create challenges. I saw some of those comments as well. Any video that includes a student, whether their voice or their image, is a student record. So anytime that's recorded, you need permission to share that with others. The way our middle school and high school teachers teach is not that they stand in front of the room and talk for 50 some odd minutes, right? It's interactive. And so recording lessons that involve students being in the room does create some student privacy issues that are quite challenging to overcome, because if one student says they're not willing to have that shared, then it doesn't work. So that is one of the real challenges of recording live classes where there are students in the room for use, is that it creates a legal privacy challenge, and that's a difficult one to overcome.
There's some questions about flexibility and timing. So when would families need to opt in or out of in-person learning if that's what happens? And is there the ability to change that choice at some point?
So this is a really important question that I know is driving a lot of my colleagues. We're spending a lot of time thinking about this, because if you want to plan for one model and you're going to have some students in distance, some students in person, there's changes, and we're really focused on the CDC guidelines for space. At some point, you can't make that change very easily. I mean, moving to remote probably is an easier change to moving in person. So we may have, this isn't all mapped out, but we may have a thicker bar to start virtual and come back into a live class than going the other way, because we can't create new sections, and the public health piece is huge. I mean, I saw some comments before. I just want to, and I know it's 5:58, so we're running out of time, but one of the other pieces that Rupert Roy Clark, our facilities director, is working on is, and I spoke about this at the earlier one, so I'll try to be briefer, is that we want to increase ventilation. So any rooms that don't have windows will not be used. So at the middle school, there's a significant number of classrooms that don't have windows. Those will not be used for students. They may be teacher offices where one teacher uses it, but they won't be used as multi-person spaces. I think the second variable is that typically we use the ASHRAE standards that balance ventilation and airflow with energy efficiency based on, again, nationally accepted standards. And we're really going to have to shift that to increase the velocity of the use of unit vents, as well as when they start and when they turn off each day. And so we are looking actively at how to do that, which spaces have the best airflow, and highlighting those spaces. And so I do think it's a really critical piece to consider for all of us when we think about health and safety. We talked about masks and outdoor spaces, but we also have to really focus on how do we improve the ventilation of indoor spaces, and what indoor spaces are we saying we won't use. And the middle school, unfortunately, from a space perspective, has a significant number of spaces. Maybe it's worth just briefly, if I can pull it up, sharing that screen of the middle school map, if you don't mind, Ms. McDonald and Ms. Hall, just to show how it impacts things. Is that okay with you? So let me see if I can do this quickly, and if I can't, then there we are. You can see, and let me make it larger. You can see on the map for that middle school, these are exterior spaces that do have windows. This room, C4A, actually does have a window. It doesn't look like it on this kind of very simple map. But you've got all these full-size classrooms in the interior of the building. They don't have windows. And when we've looked at it and talked to the Amherst Health Department, as well as Rupert, as well as Jill, we've opted not to use those spaces in the fall. So I think we are looking both at indoor spaces and outdoor spaces, and all those pieces around the health and safety of our faculty and students.
I know we're getting close. There are a few more that I think we can get to. Is that okay with folks if we just do a couple more? Okay. One of them was around communication with families who have children with IEPs or other special needs. Will there be more direct communication with those families?
Yes, and we've been trying to have surveys and other tools for now. I think as we develop an articulated plan, we will. And Dr. Brady works with CPAC, which is a wonderful organization, the Special Ed Parent Advisory Council. I think Mr. Demling is one of the school committee reps to that. And, she, like even the special ed guidance today, the moment it came out, forwarded to the CPAC president. So, I can communicate that to Dr. Brady and to CPAC and think about how to do that differently. But there will be a lot more individual communication as we actually develop a specific plan for people's consideration.
Okay, great. There were questions about confirming staff and student access to all the technology they need for remote learning.
Yeah, so, thanks to our incredible PGOs, we were able to, at actually the secondary level, we're at a one-to-one program, so Chromebooks wasn't the challenge, but it was mobile hotspots. So we did purchase mobile hotspots and deliver them to all students and families. We did individual reach outs, phone calls, and emails who requested them. And so we'll need to continue and keep at that because our student body changes over the summer and over the course of the year. And we did collect significant amount this year because they do need to be updated. So some students are using them for summer school programs, and we'll need to get them and update them. But it is something that we've recognized as a challenge. In our survey data, the vast majority of staff who responded indicated that they had what they needed, and we're following up with those. It was a relatively small percentage who needed support. And we do have some folks who live in a space where even a mobile hotspot, there are towns with no Wi-Fi access and no cell service, and that's a harder nut to crack for staff, and we will have to try to do individual problem solving around that if they're working in a virtual environment.
Okay. This question came up this morning as well, use of other spaces in the community that are available.
Yeah, so we have looked at other spaces in the community. One of our challenges, any space we use would require an administrator and a nurse to be on site. And so the spaces we've looked at really didn't increase our classroom load significantly. Like it'd be like 4 classes in this space or 3 classes in that space. So as we've looked, we haven't been able to identify a space that has a critical mass of classroom spaces enough where we could justify it both financially and otherwise.
Okay. And then this question I'm curious about, is there no such thing as snow days anymore?
That's actually an interesting topic and something that we are actively talking about at an administrative level. And I'd like to see if we can shift that, not just so I sleep later in the winter in the mornings, but I think that there'd be good reason even in a hybrid model to think really differently about what snow days are and how do we provide education differently. So it's something we're actively thinking about. DESE ended this year the kind of blizzard bag model that some districts were using. I'll be honest, in the past, I was really down on blizzard bags, particularly from an access point of certain students and how quickly we could transition them to online education. We're in a little different world now. So we are looking for guidance about the flexibility to do that. And I'll just say, not speaking for the school committee, for myself, I'm really open to that idea. I think it makes a whole lot of sense. And it provides us some flexibility that even if we are in an in-person model at this point, we have worked out a lot of those the barriers to virtual education in a different way than I could say a year ago. So more soon on that will require a state flexibility, and we don't have that. The blizzard bag is just basically a way, it was the informal term that districts used for when it was a snow day that students did online learning or other learning activities to count to their 180 days of school.
All right, and then I think maybe one to end on that's come up a few times is how will we adjust to new information, changing information about the science behind the virus, and then information that is released or then gets adjusted.
Yeah, so I can respond to that. So I will just say in the last week, I've been on conference calls or individual phone conversations with doctors at Bay State Medical Center, with Mass General, the doctors who are advising some folks at the state. I got an email today from someone at UMass who's a specialist in airborne things, because that's certainly a focus. And I think, all of that's really been critical. So while we are talking about CDC guidance in terms of spacing, there's nothing that I've read that convinces me that the school committee should change its tune in terms of sticking with 6 feet. I know there's some people who disagree with that, and we've read some documents, but the individual conversations I'm having, and I know others are having routinely, Jill has regular conference calls with the Department of Public Health at the state. So as the situation evolves, I want people to know we are talking about the CDC guidelines, because I think that's the best thing that we have at the moment, but we're getting active information from the major teaching hospitals in Massachusetts, the Department of Public Health, and local experts, including at UMass down the road. So it's, we are staying up with that, and we're keeping up with it. I know there's some comments. I'm not going to I'll just reference where to find it. So we did get incredibly useful feedback from students about what does and doesn't work for them for distance learning. I want to plug, and if Sasha is able to find it, maybe we can put the link on here. Our fall 2020, we have a specific website. It has all of the information. It has the raw data from every survey that we've offered for students, for families, from staff members. It also has a compilation and some analysis that's been completed in slide decks that were presented to the school committee. So in terms of one-stop shopping, I just really recommend that you have this site bookmarked, and that you're able to take advantage of that, because there is an incredible amount of information that's on there, and I'll put it on here as a comment. And we'll continue to update it on a daily basis. Every time we do a survey, our commitment is we're going to share it transparently with the community. And I think particularly we have an Amherst College intern who's fabulous, and he did a lot of deep analysis of trends, because when you look at the surveys, you'll see some of the results are about 140 pages long, and some people love that. Tiffany will love looking at numbers and analyzing them, and I love that I have a wonderful Amherst College intern who can do some of that and put together summaries of both qualitative and quantitative data. So that link is on there on the chat, and so please take advantage of that one as we go. And I'll turn it back to Ms. Hall or Ms. McDonald.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we are a little past time. I sincerely apologize if I missed or kind of mischaracterized a question. We're saving these questions, trying to incorporate them in our conversations in the future, and maybe have a document that we can share to make sure all of your questions do get answered. So I will turn it back over to Chair McDonald.
Thank you. And I was going to add that the same question was asked in the earlier afternoon session. So we will be incorporating all of the comments and questions that we've been hearing in these 2 town halls in our discussions on Tuesday and all future conversations. And we also received a request to create an FAQ page, which we can absolutely do within that site that Dr. Morris and Sasha shared in the chat. So I will also second or plus to that recommendation to bookmark that website, because there is a lot of really great information there. And as we progress through the rest of the summer, more information will be there as well. That will be your best source. So thank you, everybody. And please remember to email us at any time, schoolcommittee@arps.org. For public comment for our meetings, or just in between. We also have a phone line where we're taking voice messages, which are guaranteed to come in clear, no blurriness whatsoever when during our meetings. And that phone number is included on all of our agendas, as well as several of us have it on our Facebook pages. So, Dr. Morris?
If I just add, I'm sorry, Allison, just another note is if you know people who are hoping to be on this call and got, it was a nice day out and that sucked them away, lost track of time, or, we're tied up, this same YouTube link that everyone's watching, it automatically records, and all the information, this whole show, including you can see the live chat and everything, is available. So please feel free to share this if you found it helpful, or if there was points that you felt like someone else would benefit from seeing. Please do share that link out, and it'll be up indefinitely. And we all thank you for viewing. We had a good audience, about 200 people. So thank you all for hanging on. Thanks for Tiffany and Simon for spending an hour and 10 minutes of their summer. I know they're thinking about this stuff a lot, but thank you for doing that, and Jill and the school committee members as well. Thanks, everybody.